Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for your punctuality. We had quite a few registrants today, so we'll just give folks time to filter in. Thanks for popping your name in the chat, Hassan. Welcome. Anyone else who would like to introduce themselves, please feel free in the chat. It's nice to see such a good mix of familiar, friendly names and new ones on the phone or on the phone. What is it? 1995. Uh, on the computer screen. We'll give it one more minute and then I think we'll go ahead and kick things off. Always using my dial up. Thanks, Chris. Okay, let's go ahead and get things started. We've got almost 50 attendees on the line now, so I think that's a great number to kick us off today. So welcome. Thank you everyone for joining us for this presentation of Rags to Revenue, Unlocking Post-Consumer Textile to Textile Recycling in the United States. Next slide. So today's webinar, we hope will be an interactive one. Eileen, our COO, and myself, America's Program Director, will be introducing you to the content we developed in partnership with Accenture around the opportunity for textile to textile recycling in the US. What you're looking at on the right side of the screen is an agenda for this session. But I want to start by framing things up with a little bit about the origins of this project, who Accelerating Circularity is, why we embarked on this work, and a little bit about the background of the paper. So at Accelerating Circularity, oh, can we go back? We believe that collaboration is really the foundation of action and really is the means to the inevitable transformation to circular textile systems. So in that vein, we really want to thank our friends at TOMRA for introducing Accelerating Circularity to the Accenture team, who were our partners in this paper. And also want to thank my colleagues internally who helped spearhead the effort on this side, particularly Eileen, who's on the call with me today, and Ellen on my team who did a lot of hard work on the paper. So thank you everyone for that. And of course, all of the contributors to the research, those of you who gave interviews to the research team whose work we have relied on for the past 6 years in our work. Those of you who participate in our programs, none of this is possible without your collaboration. So thank you all. Next slide. For those of you who are new to Accelerating Circularity, we are an action-oriented nonprofit focused on textile-to-textile recycling at commercial scale through a collaborative, stakeholder-led approach. Our mission is to build circular systems that turn used textiles into new raw materials. And that is in service of our vision of a world in which textiles are no longer wasted. And what that means for our work, next slide, is that it enables us to build powerful connections so that those who work with us are really part of a trusted network of people who are really committed to making textile to textile recycling reality. It also facilitates collaboration. We build real solutions that come out of the lessons of the programs that we build. That means that those who participate in our programs are able to take what they've done and bring it into their everyday work in their organizations and make it really actionable. It also allows for participants to demonstrate their leadership in the industry and really, sort of take a position of, sort of as a front runner in the industry by, being sort of the first to be able to say, we put 40% recycled content into this type of product, and half of it was, from post-consumer sources, et cetera, et cetera. So, as I've already said, we believe that change is inevitable, that it's non-negotiable. And by working with us, we believe that, we enable our partners to be part of that. Next slide. So about this particular report, the need for post-consumer textile-to-textile recycling in the United States and how to unlock it, we really undertook this project to clarify and quantify the reality of the potential for textile-to-textile recycling in the US. So we talk a lot about, this industry and various pockets of it. And we thought that it was a really interesting and dynamic time to focus in on the US in particular, to figure out what's feasible in the US right now based on who the players are, what their capabilities are, what market and other factors are influencing the industry, and how we can leverage that for the best opportunity to scale. Next slide. So many of you may be familiar with this information, but just to frame up the next part of the conversation, I think it's important to set a little bit of context here. The United States generates, a huge amount of used textiles. This data is a little bit old, but the EPA estimates that it's around 15.4 million metric tons. That's from 2018. And based on the latest data, less than 15% of those textiles are diverted from landfills. And of what's diverted, less than 1% is recycled back into new clothing. So back of the envelope math, that means over 13 million metric tons of textiles are sent to landfills each year. And so keep that in your mind. Used textiles, we know, are generally categorized into two types. We've got post-industrial. That's the stuff that, gets cut off during production, other similar types of material. And then post-consumer. So that's for the purposes of how we're defining it in the United States, defective goods, unsold merchandise, residential clothing, hospital uniforms, hotel linens. It's a big mixed bag of materials. Post-consumer use textiles are really the bigger problem in terms of sheer volume. We know from data coming out of Europe that around 85% of the total volume of used textiles are generated by consumers. We know that similarly in the United States, this is a huge and pretty much unaddressed issue. So that's the that's the issue around the materials that we're going to be talking about today. Now, how are we going to be talking about dealing with those? We're going to be talking about textile to textile recycling, which is taking those materials and processing them into new fibers and yarns. Now, just for clarity there, this is different than what we're going to call downcycling, which is using those recycled materials for a different purpose or product than it was originally intended. So, for example, if you cut a t-shirt and turn it into an industrial wiping rag, or if you shred it and turn it into insulation materials. So just so that we're all clear on terminology for the rest of the presentation, when we say recycling as shorthand, we mean turning something into new fibers and yarns for fabric. And when we say downcycling, we're talking primarily about rags and shoddy applications or other similar applications. Next slide. So this takes us to the textile hierarchy. So as we're ideally, thinking about what to do with all of these used post-consumer textiles, we need to evaluate them along their best use hierarchy to determine what to do with them to maximize their value. And so of what is currently diverted from landfills through, thrift stores or collection bins or what have you, we need to assess each of them for their best use and direct them along one of the potential pathways outlined in the hierarchy. So the questions we need to consider are, what is the best pathway to reducing GHG impacts? What is the industry actually capable of doing with this material right now? And then also what's missing to improve our current capabilities to bring us in line with the hierarchy. Next slide. So one thing to help us think through this in a practical way for the United States context is to think through, so what is the actual recycling capacity in the United States? And it's somewhat limited. So what you're looking at here is just a quick map of the major recycling facilities or companies in the United States. They all have different levels of maturity and different benefits and challenges. What you're seeing on the map are mechanical recyclers, chemical recyclers, and a thermomechanical recycler. The 2 chemical recyclers are operating and 6 are in the planning phases. And then there are 10 mechanical recyclers, although most of them are primarily outputting shoddy and insulation. So that tells us that the actual infrastructure for recycling for textile to textile applications in the US right now is still somewhat limited. Next slide. So the biggest lever of change is to address that, 13 million tons of mostly post-consumer use textiles that are being sent to landfills instead of diverted, right? So even assuming that we could improve the value and disposition of what is now being diverted, we've still got 13 million tons that's not being diverted. So we have to ask ourselves, what are the key barriers to scaling post-consumer T2T in the US today? And then devise realistic options on how to overcome those barriers while also reducing GHG impacts and supporting jobs in the industry and strengthening economic viability. So now that I've sort of framed up the context we're working in for the really hard topics, I'm going to pass it over to Eileen.
Thanks, Sarah, and thanks to everyone who's joining us today. Let's move to the next slide and talk through what some of these barriers are to building a scalable textile recycling system for the US. Our first barrier is insufficient and inconsistent feedstock. That feedstock is taking those unwanted textiles and creating them to be the feedstock that goes into a recycling processing plant. So the usable feedstock for recycling is lost at each step of the value chain. That's through collection, sorting, and then the pre-processing that meets the requirements of a recycler. The collection infrastructure in the US is fragmented. It's a mix of nonprofit collectors, for-profit collectors, municipalities, and it can differ. It can differ across cities, states, and regions. There is collection going on, which is good. That collection is typically focused on reuse, which means there's a lot of unwanted textiles that aren't even entering a collection system. They're going straight to the landfill. That's that 13 million tons that Sarah's referencing. And listen, we know that the reuse is great and we need it to continue. However, the collection needs to be expanded to support what could be a scalable system for textile to textile recycling. Another component of developing more and consistent feedstock is that the infrastructure is also tied to consumer behavior, and consumer participation is low. If what is collected is not sufficient, then we're never going to build this system to be able to meet the demands of what textile recyclers could potentially recycle into new materials. And so looking at, how are we going to continue to build that consumer participation is something that is one of our key barriers. Moving on to the second barrier where production costs are inefficient, making recycled materials more expensive. That's what we mean by an uncompetitive production cost. Today, post-consumer textile to textile recycling, it is expensive, and as a system, it's largely unprofitable. There may be some businesses that are making a profit, but if we look across the whole system, that's a challenge. And the current value chain is relying heavily on manual sorting. We've got expensive logistics because stuff is moving around a lot. There's some costly pre-processing steps. That's removing disruptors, the shredding process, and some of the recycling technologies are also capital intensive. So then a key element to efficiency is working at scale. All steps in the current scenario are operating well below economic scale in the US. And then our last barrier is not enough demand. The demand for recycled fiber and materials is low. There's some good reasons for that. The brands and consumers are going to be hesitant to commit to recycled fiber due to the current price premiums tied to some uncertainties around quality and then limitations on traceability today. And at the same time, we've also got there's very little policy and not enough incentives that would drive adoption of textile to textile recycling to build up that further demand. So all three of these barriers are pretty significant. At the same time, they all represent opportunities to reinvent the norms of the industry. So going to the next slide, want to pause just for a moment here because we've shared a lot of opportunity or a lot of information. And before we move to our solutions, want to just pause for a minute and we'll take a few questions just to make sure that we're kind of all aligned on what the state of the industry is today, and then we'll move to some of our proposed solutions.
And if you have questions, please drop them in the chat. Okay, we've got one from Jay. When you mention recycling tech being capital intensive, was this in reference to machine capital, or does this also include human capital and others? Eileen, I'll give that one to you.
Yeah, so I think the largest dollar amount and the largest investment needed is primarily going to be around the technologies, and that would be both machinery, but we also see that as some of the other technologies that can support more efficient sorting and processing. That's going to be things like there's different ways that products can be labeled. There's how a brand may be able to share out what their products are that could be existing with a collector or sorter. Those are steps that need massive amounts of investment and understanding in order to be able to shift how quickly we're able to move those materials. There is definitely always a human component to this, not just the manual sorting, but any of these technologies that we want to employ, they're going to include the people that will develop or run those operations.
Okay, we've got another question here. Understanding that recycling challenges can also be due to addressing fiber blends, how do you see this being addressed with chemical recycling at scale? Sarah, I'll give this one to you.
Sure. So there's a lot of really, great advances happening with chemical or advanced recycling. Right now, what we're seeing is that those technologies are really primarily still focused on, a single target fiber. And that is because as you introduce any other fiber, the process efficiency still goes down significantly. So in order for the economics to work, even if the process is technically capable of accepting, a blend or an impure material, for the economic feasibility of the model, they're still really targeting quite pure feedstocks. That said, the potential is there to layer these processes, and we are seeing that. In terms of the US opportunity, we're seeing a lot of lab demo pilot plants starting here. But when we're looking at scaled commercial plants, we're seeing more development overseas. So, it's a complex issue. But certainly there's potential in future for advanced recycling to address blended materials, but it's going to be a layered process. It's not going to be an out of the box, throw this chemistry at it and it solves all of our problems.
Thank you, Sarah. We'll do a couple more questions, and then just so the group knows, we will have a Q&A at the end, and we can also come back to some of the questions that we're not able to answer. Let's see. There was a question about why are we not speaking on designing a life cycle into the product?
I can take that one.
Sure.
I think so what we are talking about specific to this paper that we released is very specific towards what's needed to allow a textile to textile recycling system to grow and scale in the US. We use the spent textile hierarchy that Sarah shared in an earlier slide, where we are in favor of all of those other steps, which includes reductions in consumption. It includes looking at, repair and reuse. At the same time, we still see that the likelihood is that if we look at numbers today, the volume of spent textiles that are generated by consumers is still incredibly high. And so those textile recycling systems will still be needed to tackle that volume of textiles that are out there.
Thank you, Eileen. We'll do one more question now. There's a question around EPR laws and accelerating this process, and also kind of where's the threshold where profit and revenue become a less of a priority than the need to do what's necessary. Give that one to you, Eileen.
Sure. So talking about EPR, we certainly see that, and you'll hear me mention this as part of our solutions, that EPR laws will help to support increased collection and development of feedstock that can go into recycling streams. So those are a good progression of and an example of how policy can help support the changes that we see as needing to happen to build this system. Looking at kind of where profit and revenue, how do they relate to the need to just do what's needed and address all of these materials? Look, I think that there needs to be a system that gets built that will result in profitable businesses across the whole value chain. And that's always a challenge in the textile industry and other industries. And where I think there is opportunity for building this system is this sense that it is the right thing to do. And because we know that, it will start to develop further. And so I see them going hand in hand. Sort of reality is that we do need an operating system that creates materials that work for the purposes that we all use the textiles that are in our closets and in our homes today. Why don't we keep moving, and then Ellen, I'll just ask you to monitor that chat so that we can pull in the right questions as we go through the subsequent slides. Okay, so our proposed solutions as we start to look at how to address the insufficient and inconsistent feedstock. So we've kind of created this grid that has each different solution, and then where that solution can take hold across our collectors, our sorters, recyclers, as well as the brands and the policymakers. And so if we think about what is needed to build this system, and when we worked with Accenture, we wanted to think big, think about those 13 million tons of material and how does it become feedstock for new material. And then also, looked at other industries, looked at other regions. Europe is a great example because they're working on this as well. And so specific to feedstock, we see this opportunity to expand the collection infrastructure. This can be done with more collection through charities, for-profit collectors, and municipalities. And really thinking about what would make it easier and more convenient for consumers. Consumers, the purchasing accelerates through convenience, and how can we look at convenience as a key element for how do we expand collection? There's also opportunity with policy. We mentioned EPR, and certainly monitoring and involved with how SB 707 will evolve in California, because it's a great example of where EPR can increase collection. We see opportunity with more standardized specs. So right now, each recycler has differences in what sort of materials, what their requirements are for what goes into their system. And over time, working with recyclers, collectors, and sorters, there's opportunity for more efficiency as those specs get defined and similarities are greater than the differences. And that allows textile to textile recycling to be more efficient, as well as increase that volume of feedstock that's available. Consumer awareness, we're all familiar with the campaigns for how we recycle other aspects of our waste, and really looking towards those opportunities for collectors, sorters, brands, and policymakers to all play a role in supporting a shift in consumer behavior, that we're all much more aware of what is happening, where are we depositing our unwanted products. And then one of the other elements is increasing the cost to landfill or incinerate. Landfill is relatively inexpensive across the nation. There's pockets of higher prices. That's where population is more concentrated or land is at a premium. And one of the, using market forces, the higher the cost of landfill, the more motivated everyone is to find an alternative. And for textiles, that alternative can start to be moving into the recycling streams that we intend to grow across the US. And then this came up in the chat as a question, design for recyclability. This is absolutely an important way to develop feedstock volume and consistency. There are guidelines today that address how to design for recyclability, and this is evolving because frankly, as more recycling capability becomes available, collection and sorting are developed further, these are going to require a revisit of how those guidelines come together. But it's absolutely a component of being able to build that feedstock that we need to support recycling. I am going to pause there, and interested to kind of hear from all of you. What are some of the other solutions that come to mind when it comes to the feedstock, and how we can continue to build out what those solutions may be, and build this system for supporting textile to textile recycling?
So
I'm
Eileen,
actually going to grab this last question about what to do with clothing and textiles that are unwanted. It seems related to feedstock. And, really the charities are a great option for being able to move any of your unwanted textiles into a stream that either goes to reuse or eventually to a recycling stream. I think it's important to understand that there is existing locations today, but want to make sure that you're looking at it rather than immediately just putting any of your textiles into a waste stream. I see comments about education. I certainly think that's an important one, and something that is going to be new for people, and it's a great opportunity to engage. And yes, agree with the suggestion around making sure that we include some of those industrial, the uniform businesses, the hospitality linens, hotel linens. All of those are great opportunities for collection of feedstock. And some of the elements around that type of feedstock that is helpful right now is as Sarah mentioned, some of the newer recycling technologies, they need a more pure stream of feedstock. And when you are able to get some of those um, the volumes of textiles that will come out of hospitality or a hospital, those are great opportunities. Uniforms as well. Those become really good opportunities for feedstock that is more pure than what you're going to see come out of uh, you know, a broader collection of post-consumer feedstock.
I love this comment from Jay. It would seem to be appropriate to increase visibility of textile feedstock across the supply chain. Eliminating the data silos between stakeholders could make sourcing and logistics more efficient. I wonder if you have any thoughts about that, Eileen.
Yeah, I think this is an area where, it's kind of buried a little deeper in the brands and the retailers, where there is a lot of known information about the garments and home goods that are produced. And if you can share that information, and make it available to, say, a collector sorter, you open up this possibility of being able to know exactly where that item needs to go from the get-go. And I think there's lots of opportunity to take that in a lot of directions that would make the logistics side of textile to textile recycling more efficient. So 100% agree with that.
And then, Connie, to your question about how much is actually overproduction, there are a lot of estimates out there related to overproduction. And, I've heard lots of numbers. Eileen, I know that you probably have some top of mind as well. Um, you know, ev everything from, very low numbers that seem probably not right to quite big numbers that also seem probably not right. Anywhere from like 5, 10 to 30%. So I think the answer is it depends. Are we talking fast fashion? Are we talking high-end luxury? Are we talking, sort of mid-market? I think the answer is really it depends. Um,
And it's definitely one of the challenges that the industry faces is how to get a higher level of accuracy that the supply that is being produced is closely matching to um, what is consumed by the customer base. And that's a element that does vary business to business. All right, I am going to keep us moving and we'll move on to our next group of solutions. And that is our uncompetitive production costs, or the positive spin on this is how to increase the efficiency of the production of recycled materials. And one of the key elements to building any production system is having a scalable system. The amount of benefit that is gained from just having enough volume is really what starts to address any of the kind of pricing challenges that surface along the way. And as mentioned earlier, textile to textile recycling in the US has not scaled. So some of the specific ways that this starts to become more efficient, starting with automation that has opportunity with collectors and sorters. But also want to, mention that, policymakers have a role in each one of these steps, that they can help to support this transition to textile recycling. We also see this location strategy as an opportunity. This is the idea that you could develop regional recycling hubs, which might save on some of the logistics expense. We also see an opportunity to aggregate materials that can also help to reduce our expenses. And then some of the other areas are the sense of reframing post-consumer textile textiles as an economic catalyst. How can we tap into reshoring with a high technology approach? What's the opportunity to view the unwanted textiles as a economic resource that is something that we could develop here in the US? And then, supporting that is also access to project financing. This has been a beneficial mechanism in other industries. It helps to build infrastructure, but basically lower cost financing of the steps in this value chain would be ways that it can be made possible. So again, going to just open this up to any additional comments about ways that we could scale more efficiently so that there is the opportunity for profit and reasonable prices for the finished product all across the value chain. I think Chamonix's got an interesting point where how do we create a price for post-consumer textile recycling as an incentive, similar to the way that glass and aluminum have been developed. And I think that's an interesting opportunity to a certain extent. Some of the EPR programs will also have a similar component where if a brand is incurs a fee for the textiles that they put out into the market, they will also likely have incentives for different ways that they build those products and that they put those products out there. And that might start to also be an opportunity to create a more efficient system. Love the idea of the digital labels. Think those are interesting ways to be able to quickly assess what something is. And let's see, on reverse logistics, and I agree. I think reverse logistics starts to become a component of, how are we looking at how things are moving to and fro. One of the things that's interesting about the textile industry is that there is a lot of movement of that product before it gets put out onto the market. And so any opportunity to reduce that expense in all of the supply chain is something that I think builds efficiency. And really love the suggestion from WM, the options to recycle textiles. That's great. That's really something that's going to be important. Oh, and we're getting to some opportunities for incentivizing the demand side of using recycled materials.
I love the subsidy suggestion that gets into some of the nitty-gritty solutions that we detail in the report.
Yeah, agreed. Great. And yeah, I think this sense of the products that consumers want that are also from recycled materials. Um, and there is, uh, you know, there's always going to be that opportunity to tie textile recycling to innovation and the new products that generate excitement among consumers. And think there's certainly room for how that starts to take hold within the market. Let's keep going. We'll tackle our last group of barriers. Demand. And so, wanting to talk through a couple of the higher level solutions. This first one is set market signals through regulation. The idea behind this is that if there was some sort of policy around products being required to have a level of recycled content, I also think that is something that individual brands can also tackle on their own. If you have, a need to deliver certain benefits to or meet your materials targets, that might be a way to do it. We also identified public procurement initiatives. Those are also a great way to spark adoption of new systems. That entails government purchasing of materials that would require recycled content, and that can build demand. Uh, there needs to be some emphasis on the immediate and long-term offtake agreements. Those are necessary to scale up new technologies. This is an area where we're seeing some of those agreements happening, especially in the next generation recycling technologies, and see that as a positive sign for building up that demand for recycled materials. And then I think the other one that is important to mention is that as an industry, we're able to build trust through the quality standards and traceability solutions. The industry uses quality standards and traceability to develop trust across the supply chain and with consumers. And the same is going to be true of recycled materials. And it just needs to be we all need to remember that we're meeting the demands of consumers, and that'll be a part of the textile to textile system that needs to be built. So those are the next group of solutions that we have. And I think we should move through these next couple of slides so that we reserve some time at the end. So if we can move to the next slide and just a quick summary of the solutions that we've talked about. You could advance one more, that would be great. So, we're really kind of flipping the barriers to possible solutions. We want to increase our feedstock supply. We want to boost demand and improve profitability of this system that we intend to build. And so I'm going to send things back to Sarah, and she can talk a little bit about how some of the work that we're doing is helping to build this system and how you can be a part of it as well.
Thanks, Eileen. Next slide. So I'm just going to show you a couple of examples of some of the work that we've done over the last few years with our stakeholders. This gorgeous denim pant is one of the products that came out of our programs here in the United States. This was a collaborative effort. We went from collection, sorting, pre-processing, mechanical recycling, all the way through, as you can see, to finished product. Excuse me, this denim has, as you can see, 26% recycled cotton, half of that from post-consumer material. That post-consumer material was sourced here in the United States. And this jean went on sale late last year, here in the domestic market, at a very reasonable price. And we're really, really proud of this. This is the kind of work that collaboration can produce. And this product, as well as the ones from Target that you can see on the next slide, these shared the same feedstock spec. And the denim that you'll see on the right-hand side of this slide also shared the same yarn specs. And so this is really, I think, a great example of how through, sort of pre-competitive collaboration, open communication around challenges and solutions, we can come together and, sort of troubleshoot the challenges, but also help build the solutions together. We were able to identify, sort of quality benchmarks that all of these products would need to pass. And they're based on real brand performance tests, that products need to pass every single day in order to be commercial. And the work that we're building now is really about taking these pilot scale programs, because even though all of these programs met commercial MOQs, they were still, very much pilot programs. We're translating this work now into scaled commercial programs, because that's what we see as really being able to move the needle. So how do we make these running programs that can actually, be easy for a brand to adopt, and really bring these recycled materials into their supply chains in a really meaningful way. So I can go to the next slide to take questions.
Sarah, there was a question earlier around quality in recycled materials. And if you could speak to that a little bit. I think there's a bit of a perception that recycled materials are low quality.
Yeah, I think, the answer, as our colleague Petra likes to say, the answer is always it depends, right? I mean, if you put a low quality feedstock in, and you process it without the intention of it going into apparel, then yeah, you're going to have a quality issue. What we found, though, is that with high quality inputs, and as we iterate and learn about what the right settings are for processing these materials, you can get very high quality results. Those products that I was just showing did pass standard quality performance testing baselines. And in fact, in our next round of programs, we've upped what those standards are, because we know that, sort of a midline performance test isn't going to really do the job. It needs to be the very highest performance baseline in order to gain mainstream adoption. So, to speak to the quality issue, of course, mechanically recycled cotton performs and looks different than virgin. But I think I saw Chris mention in the chat, it's about figuring out what's the right application for those materials. Of course, you're not going to jam 80% post-consumer into your very finest, jersey or what have you. It's about, what's the right blend, what's the right fabric, and really designing in, not just designing from circularity or designing for circularity, but designing into circularity. And so those are some of the things that we've learned. How do we work with color in denim with recycled materials? And so, happy to dive deeper into those conversations another time, but I know that there are a lot of other questions coming in.
Thank you, Sarah. Eileen, this one's for you. There have been a few questions about, is there an online marketplace connecting those that may have materials to recycle? to buyers? And also, are there lists or accessible information online around collection? If you could share on that, that would be great.
Yeah. So in terms of collection, as well as the recycling, we have published directories that are on Accelerating Circularity's website under resources. And in addition to that, we are in the midst of building out a platform that will help to match where materials are available and where they can move to. And following that spent textile hierarchy is part of what will be built into the tool that we're building. That is something that will be available. We're completing it this year and likely to be available in early January. But excited to see interest in that because we do see that as an opportunity for us to support how materials can move into recycling streams.
Thanks, Eileen. We've got a question here. What are your thoughts on independent and small brands activating these procedures, and how can there be an incentive for them and not a penalty compared to large corporate brands that may not be implementing those strategies? I'll give that one to you, Sarah.
That's a tough one. We have worked with both large and small brands, and I would say that, one of the things that we've seen, and we're happy to be able to see movement on as our work has evolved, is that smaller brands are able to sort of piggyback on the work that the larger brands have been spearheading, right? They've, by again through collaboration, that they've been able to sort of share the burden of the R&D and the risk. So there's that element of risk sharing, that you are able to take on when you're working collaboratively. And then the results of that, as it scales out, we're able to share out to the industry at large. Here's what we've learned. Here's how you can do this. And also, now all of these mills have the capacity to develop these materials. And then it's much more accessible to the smaller brands. So that's a big aspect of the work that Accelerating Circularity is doing now, in fact, is not just saying, large brands and retailers with, giant sustainability budgets, like we can work with you, but also, these materials are now more accessible to all the players in the industry, no matter their scale.
Thanks, Sarah. I think we've got time for one more question. Jay's question here in the chat. What have been the barriers to getting more traction on policy? Is there unclear incentives from a policymaker's perspective? I'll give that one to you, Eileen.
I think that it's getting this issue on the radar. I think where it starts to percolate, that's what you're seeing happen in California. We know that Washington and the state of New York are also have been looking at, is there something they want to move on for textiles? And then in addition to just that exposure to there is an issue here, is also going to be they are looking to be educated on it so that what gets put together is something that can take hold for the industry. Those seem like the kind of two main elements that I've seen in my time involved in accelerating circularity. Sarah, I don't know if you have anything you'd want to add to that.
No, I think that covers it pretty well.
Yeah. And very quickly in terms of this, I see a comment about the FTC labeling. I certainly feel like that's always going to be an opportunity. But I also encourage brands to take their own point of view on what they want to call out, because I think there's always that storytelling that makes the innovation that brands deliver more interesting and exciting for consumers.
Noting that we're just about at time, I want to just say that we will compile all of the questions. I know that we didn't get to all of them, so we'll compile them and do our best to respond, whether online or off, to all of them. And we will also have some follow-ups that go out after this to everyone who registered. So don't worry if you didn't quite catch everything. But if we can go to the next slide, I just want to let you all know that all of the content that we covered today is available in the report that we published. And so if you want to scan that QR code, you can access it all. And we do invite you all to get more involved with us. If you're not already participating in our programs, please reach out. We are always sort of recruiting folks to our team. And so I just want to say thank you so much for joining us today. You can advance to the next slide. Also want to thank Accenture once again for being a really fantastic partner in this project. We could not have done this without their support. And again, thank you to everyone who contributed their knowledge, expertise, time, and effort to the report. And again, there's our email address if you want to reach out to us one-on-one, if you would like to join one of our programs. We would love to hear from you. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much.